Cheers to that.
Cheers.
Okay. Welcome to Drunk on Software. We're here with Matt Raible, and Matt, this guy's he's a legend. He goes, I mean, we've been reading his stuff forever. Back when we were nobodies. I mean, we still are nobodies.
I was going to say, something changed.
I mean, at least we have our own video podcast now. I mean, that's,
Yeah, we have something to invite him to.
You have to have a camera to have a video podcast, and so that...
Do you own the camera, or does Adobe?
Adobe does, so...
Okay.
All right.
Adobe's somebody.
So anyways, Matt, great guy. You know, you've been doing web stuff forever.
Yep.
So, you've seen a lot of things change. What do you do, first of all? What are you doing now? Where are you at? What are you up to?
I've had some shitty jobs, that's for sure. But,
What's the worst? We got to start here. What's the worst development job you've ever had? You don't even have to name the client.
I don't know if I should say. So it was a client where I didn't get to work with open source software.
Oh.
And I had to attempt to evolve their proprietary software.
Yeah.
That's always fun.
The worst part of that is like a kick in the stomach, too, because then you get nothing for your resume that nobody cares about.
And you don't even enjoy it at all.
Totally.
Yeah. All right, sorry. That was a good caveat for me. So what else have you done that you actually liked?
So the thing I enjoy the most, I've found, is if I'm actually working on, I don't know what it is about open source software, but when I'm working on a project with open source software, I think it's probably the blogging aspect of it, in the sense that, I can learn something new, and I've banged my head against the wall all day long with it. And, part of that banging was searching like mad and not finding the answer, and then being able to blog about it and having that satisfaction of, I figured out the answer and now I can help other people.
Totally.
And so
is that like your philosophy of blogging? Because your blog is super popular, and it seems like maybe just making it all right, I've figured this out and I want to save you guys from having to figure it out.
If you notice over the years, I started in 2002, and there's interesting spots for me technically. And then there's parts that just aren't that interesting technically. And I think if you ask people that have followed me for that long, they would agree. Yeah. And so the interesting spots are the good projects.
Right.
Right? Where I'm learning new stuff and blogging about it and stuff like that. And the ones that aren't that much are clients that I'm not learning anything at.
Right.
And stuff like that. And also what I found is if I ever use any of the projects that I contribute to, then I'll work on them a lot more. And so that could lead to interesting posts that aren't really work related, but solve something at work and then contribute it back to open source or something like that.
Very totally. That's cool.
Yeah.
It's like that whole like open source being beyond just a license. It's it's like a methodology for how you interact with people and community. And
I mean, the best thing is when you put something out there and you get a solution that's better than yours.
Yeah, totally.
You're like, wow,
humbling,
awesome.
but awesome.
Great for the ego.
Right.
Yeah.
No, cool. Totally.
Cool. So what are you working on now?
So I'm working for a client that wants to take their Web 1.0 application and make it into more dynamic, more rich. And they don't care so much about SEO and stuff like that. So they basically throw the baby out with bathwater and said, we want to pick one of the best Ajax-based technologies and develop Sophia style, to coin a term or whatever, which is, back ends services, front ends talks to those services, and they don't live in the same war kind of thing.
Sophia, I haven't heard that. Where did that
come on?
Come
You've
from?
heard it?
No.
I
always called it
Sui?
I've always called it Soaria.
Soaria from the Adobe guy.
No wonder that one didn't catch on. I mean, it sounds like diarrhea.
Well, Sophia hasn't even caught on, right? It's Sui. I mean, I think the guys that coined those terms are all about this is going to be the next Ajax, right? All we got to do is come up with the term.
Right, exactly.
These things have been here for so long, and they'll just take
when they do that, do they start with the term or the solution? Because I want to just come up with a cool word, and then that's my new open source project.
Well,
I really want to start a project called Climax because it just sounds like something you need, but I don't really know what it does yet. So I'm kind of, if you could help us after the video cast,
it just makes everyone happy, huh?
Yeah, why wouldn't you want Climax in your application?
It's as high as you can.
This is the last interview of the day, and these were full, and they're not anymore. So sorry.
So Sophia.
So Sophia, service-oriented front-end architecture.
Okay.
Wow.
And
I like
yeah,
that. I like that.
fancy,
I don't
huh?
know. It's too
The
involved.
freaking SOA thing, right? I mean, that's just
Yeah.
a new word for EJB, so IBM can sell more stuff.
The vendor evolution.
They'll come up.
What
Well, it
we
was
gave you.
ESB 2 years ago, right?
Yeah.
Right.
They got a new
Every
one
2
in
years, you gotta have the new.
yeah. So it was a paper written by these guys down in Australia, and it was basically stuff we already knew, but SOAP or some sort of XML-based, text-based
Right.
service on the back end, and some sort of service on the front end or client that talks to it. And they named every client that's possible, right? You can use
Right.
Xforms, you can use Silverlight, you can use Flex, you can use Flash, you can use Ajax, and all that kind of
Whatever.
stuff.
Yeah.
Right.
Doesn't
and
matter.
so 20-page paper.
As long as it's like logic on the client interacting with these services.
Right. And so they wrote a paper on it, posted on server side, about 20-page PDF. Pretty good, right? I mean, you read it and you enjoy it, well written. And then about a month later, the Appcelerator guys, Jeff Haney and
Yeah.
I forget the other guy's name, but they came out with SUI.
Okay.
And it was basically a couple
Interesting.
blog posts that they wrote, service-oriented UI.
Okay.
So is that the
Okay.
same thing, but without all the options on the UI, and you have to use a Appcelerator?
Right.
Okay.
Well, the funny thing was, so InfoQ summarized their blog post, and this comes out, and everyone's and those guys, it was a month later, and they didn't even know about Sophia,
Huh.
and it was like, you guys are talking about the same thing,
Right.
right? And neither of them
Yeah.
has agreed upon a term.
Interesting.
And you got to
this
wonder
reminds
about the
me-
one, right? It's academics over here, and
Yeah.
then it's guys trying to sell a product over here.
Right,
but it's a free product, so how do you sell it? I don't know.
Yeah. Adobe, this reminds me, 2 years ago, Adobe was positioning Flex as being a SOC, services-oriented client. So that one obviously didn't catch on.
Sock.
Yeah, SOC. No wonder, I mean, not a good name. So
So
there's
speaking
all
of
these
it,
terms kind of trying to describe the same thing. It's interesting that
Yeah.
not one term has really been latched onto yet.
now because it's still down to some front end, some back end, right? People
Right.
haven't been able
Well,
to
that's not
separate.
exactly a new thing to people.
Right. You just
I
got to
mean,
come
the
up
idea
with
that you're
a good
separating
term.
them is-
that same architecture still has a chance. Just with a good
Isn't
term.
that the architecture
Well,
we've
let's
been
call it
using
Climax.
for-
You just got to come
exactly.
up with what the acronyms
If you
mean.
do it well, it's only when done well. I didn't even realize that pun. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
No, isn't that? I mean, fine, it's a service, but what's revolutionary about?
Nothing.
I mean, a good
it's-
developer's been separating those tiers for quite some time.
Well, they have, but they've been serving up the pages still, right, from the server side.
Well, yeah,
running
it
on
is. There is absolutely a shift in the implementation and a true line that didn't exist. But
Right.
most teams, like the J2E patterns book, that's all it is decoupling all those things. So
Right.
it's not like it doesn't seem revolutionary.
Right.
Understanding the nuances of having client-side
But
logic
Ajax
and those
wasn't
things.
revolutionary, right?
But the term
It's just a good term.
revolutionized it.
That's what we need is a term.
Absolutely.
Right.
Something to get the marketing people like ramped up on, you know?
So you
This
can be the
interview's
father
going
of
long. It's too
Climax.
fun.
The father of climate.
Grandfather.
Cheers to that. The father of
I
climate.
hope you're climaxing at home right now. Wow.
Hopefully
I hope
not
my
while watching
family
this.
doesn't follow our video cast. I love you, Mom.
Okay.
This is
So,
the second time
back
today I
to,
can't even get back into reality.
Yeah, back to so what you're working on. So you have this client. They wanted to go to Sophia, a Sophia-based architecture.
Right.
And you said they started at Ajax, so does that mean they weren't evaluating anything with a client-side runtime, Silverlight, Flash?
Right. They
Java?
were basically they liked the HTML-based open web stuff,
Right.
JavaScript, CSS. They had skills in those areas.
And is that based on a preference or because their traffic can be any device or?
Skill set. what were
Skill
the-
set. They hired me. Right. I told them Flex sucks, and went from
totally.
there. No, we so they do want to use Flex, but they figured it would be more suited towards the component in their site that really need
Right.
that rich interaction,
Right.
and the rest of the site is more like typical web pages, but they want it to pop faster. And the real truth of it is the reason why they changed from this Web 1.0 architecture to Web 2.0 is they tried it with the traditional basically Java web framework.
Right.
Can you name
with-
that framework?
Nope.
or- Okay.
with a lot of Ajax.
Right.
And they went to production, and it absolutely failed
Interesting.
because they're very high
Interesting.
traffic and just couldn't handle the load.
So are they looking to just take their Web 1.0 features and just enhance them a bit, or is it really
Unfortunately,
yeah.
So we've been
common thing with new technologies.
right. So we've been creating a Web 1.0 application with Web 2.0 technologies.
So you get some nice little.
Now, does a lot of
widgets
that come
and
down to the designers and not having designers that are really designing a new experience, or what's causing that?
Technology proof.
Okay.
Because so they took old one, rewrote
Right,
it with
okay.
Web Framework. Web Framework failed, and they say, well, we got to do this, rich client and web, REST backend.
Right.
We have to prove that that works. So that needs to go into production. Right. With no fancy features really.
Right.
And then as soon as you can prove that scales, then we'll rewrite the site.
Right.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Interesting.
It's an interesting way to invest your money so that you prove it all out. And then
Right, and we're like, can we do some neat page transitions and fades and stuff like that? And they're like, no.
Interesting.
So.
I guess if you're making money,
Right.
you don't really care what the developer wants to play with.
Right.
So is this in development or in production?
So this is it's in development and goes to production, I think, next month.
I don't think we've actually talked about.
We'll have to interview you again in a couple months and see how it goes.
Are you rewriting it or not?
Well, the most interesting thing is when we started it, we did an Ajax framework evaluation because we knew we wanted to use Ajax, and we did YUI, we did EXTJS, and we did Dojo, and we did GWT.
Yeah.
And then we did spikes on each of those. We each wrote a simple polls application with those.
Oh, cool.
And most of us didn't have a whole lot of experience with any of them, so it was
When you say polls, sorry.
you ask a question and get
Oh,
five
okay. Like a
possible
poll,
answers.
okay.
Right.
Interesting use case.
Right.
And so that was kind of all right. We want to see how these teams did and what the outcome was, and that's
Right.
how we're going to judge the different frameworks.
Yep. So I did EXTJS, and of course mine looked the best.
Yep.
Right.
Nice.
And
yeah, EXTJS has some good.
and the YUI and the Dojo ones were pretty good, but they were more progressive decoration, right, and progressive enhancement. And while the developers, I think that's good if you actually care about progressive enhancements. The client really didn't,
Yeah.
right? And so those worked well as well. But what we liked about GWT and EXTJS was like the object orientation,
Right.
and how we would write it. So it really came down to JavaScript or Java.
Right.
Which one do you want to write it in?
Right.
Right, and so most of us, we were all Java developers, and I was all for the JavaScript. I was like, I want to do in JavaScript. I've been doing Java a while. I know JavaScript pretty well. Let's do
Yeah.
it that way. And I got shot down.
Because.
Because everyone wanted to do it in Java.
Right.
So it really
okay.
came down
Just
to
their
language.
skill set and
right.
not wanting to.
Yep.
learn a
Did
new language.
the major vendor support and the Google label have anything to do with it, or was it?
Oh, for
purely-
sure.
Okay.
But the funny thing about that was, we don't have to really know JavaScript because Google does. Right?
Yeah.
And then it was like, well, Gmail's written in it, Google Reader and everything, and I'm like, no, it isn't. Right? So high traffic GWT sites, there really aren't any
Right.
that I know of.
Yeah.
I mean, those are all, it's kind of like Ruby on Rails, right? They built something and then they extracted GWT out of it, but it's
Yeah.
not like they built Gmail with GWT.
Right.
Yeah, it is compelling though. Like as a Java developer, if I ever had to do a, pure traditional browser-based technology app,
Right.
GWT is hugely appealing just because I don't really want to debug in different browsers, and
Right.
their knowledge of that stuff the appearance is superior, whether or not that's reality. I
Right.
haven't lived it enough.
Well,
to
and the
know,
funny
but-
thing about it, so I mean, it's a month and a half since we chose that.
Okay.
And we've been developing with it, and we've done really well, and we've had a lot of features that we've developed and stuff like that, and we've all very much enjoyed the experience. But GWT, like raw GWT, there's just not much there.
Right.
Right? There's no widgets. There's like a handful, maybe
It's
two.
interesting.
handfuls.
Huh.
That's
know
actually
that.
one of the compelling things for me with Flex is like there's a widget I need, it's almost always there.
Right.
I may fight with it, and may get into framework hell, but having that component set seems like something so often forgotten in Java.
Right.
Web frameworks is like, oh, now you have to actually build something, and
Well, but then there's smart GWT and there's GXT.
so those
So
Extensions
those
too.
are extensions, and they basically wrap smart client.
Are those
and they
by
wrap
Google as
EXTJS.
well, or
No.
okay?
how hard is it as a development team to extend individual components or add your own?
So it's not bad. They have JSNI, right, JavaScript Native Interface, and you can
Okay.
actually write Java methods that you just embed JavaScript in.
Oh,
So
cool.
if you know JavaScript,
Great.
not hard at all. I
So
mean,
you still
there-
get your JavaScript.
yeah, you have full access to JavaScript.
Are there nice extension points? Or are you typically writing a whole standalone component?
Well, I think the coolest thing is it's very much. I haven't done Swing development, but I've heard it's like that, right? Where you're actually a lot of stuff goes in the constructor, and it's very object oriented, but it's very easy from a refactoring sense to say, okay, this is a widget.
Right.
Gotcha.
Right, you grab it out, you use your refactoring tools, you pull it out, you reuse it in other areas. And I think with typical Java web frameworks, you get that, but you get, here's my Java class and here's my template.
Right.
Yeah.
Right, and with GWT, it's here's my Java.
That's nice.
Period.
That's
right?
cool.
One thing.
Yeah.
And I think Flex is the same way, right? You just have your XML or whatever, and you pull that
MXML
out.
and ActionScript. Yeah.
Right. You got two. See, we
Yeah,
only
there
got
are.
one.
Yeah.
One's an abstraction.
GWT.
Yeah.
Top of the other.
In Flex, the MXML
Could
is
you just use one?
Yeah, usually you define your UIs in the XML language, but all the XML language does is get code gen into ActionScript, and so you can write the ActionScript
So you could
yourself.
just write ActionScript.
Right.
Similar to-
ActionScript is the underlying
Okay.
language.
Or you can write ActionScript into your MXML and only have that, and then James makes fun of you.
Yeah, exactly.
It's like scriptlets in your JSPs.
Yeah, but then there's
Exactly.
nothing but scriptlets, and you're like, why didn't you write a servlet?
Right.
So we looked at that today. That wasn't my code.
No, it was not. It was some
has
of our
been.
code, actually.
Yeah.
Cool. So, so the project's moving along. GWT liking it, and how about the development tools? How is that for?
So the funny thing is, I've never really struggled with my development tools. Right, I've used Eclipse and IDEA and love them both.
Right.
Love them both. You're the weird
I
Java
like IDEA a
developer.
lot better.
Okay.
Eclipse sucks.
I was going to
How's
say that was a surprising.
All right.
That might have been the biggest revelation of the day.
Use them both. How's
I've
that?
never met someone who's not religious about one or the other. Was the
Well, I know the shortcut.
No, is
keys
anybody
in both.
religious about Eclipse? Does anybody actually?
There are.
Oh yeah,
there are.
That's
But
strange.
the far more sane religion, I don't want to draw any parallels to real religions, but is the idea camp in my opinion. But
It's all about the shortcut keys, though, right?
yeah,
As soon as you know those, you're good to go
I'm a
in both.
huge
Yeah.
I'm a huge fan, but because of Flex Builder and clients that use Eclipse, I gave into it.
Right.
And now it's like I go back and I'm like, it looks so much better, and I can't do anything. So there's also familiarity.
Yeah.
Right. So I've never had issues.
Yeah.
You set up your ID, you set up your project. I typically use
Time it up
Maven,
front.
generate the project.
And debugging,
files
I
and-
guess, there's some GWT, what is it called? Some way to actually debug the application.
Well, so it's taking a step back.
Okay.
I've never had so many issues with IDEs on a
Okay.
project.
Oh,
And I mean, I've switched from IntelliJ to IDEA in the same day and back again. And then the next day started with Eclipse.
Wow.
So isn't that like part of their whole value prop is that you already have these tools and you already know the paradigm?
Right.
Isn't that?
And so I'm sitting there banging my head against the wall going, man, it's great we're using Java because I'm using TextMate today because I can't get my freaking IDE to work,
Wow.
And so I've struggled with that, and I tend to think I've just got machine issues, so I ordered a new laptop, so all that'll be done this
Awesome.
week.
What kind of laptop?
MacBook Pro.
Okay.
New one,
Nice.
so
Nice.
yeah, looking forward to that. But yeah, as soon as you get it all set up, so
Right.
most of the people on my team, no issues.
Right.
Just
Okay.
Does
see
it feel
black
weird to
sheep
be
or
the
whatever.
guy that's having IDE issues? Because
Yeah.
I always look at that guy and like, oh, he
You're
just
such
doesn't
a
know what he's
dipshit,
doing.
So I'm that guy.
Yeah, well, I've been there. There's just days where,
Right.
especially in Eclipse.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Well, it might have
it's-
been idea. So,
Wow.
I close the project, working fine, reopen it. It doesn't resolve imports and stuff like that. In Eclipse, it doesn't resolve like parent test class
Wow,
imports.
that totally is the extreme end of the spectrum.
So, but once you get it all going, like you totally can set breakpoints. You can run all your tests in
Nice.
the IDE and stuff like that, and do all the debugging, and it's pretty slick. But
That's cool.
And I think if Firebug was more robust, that would be as good of an environment because you could do all the debugging and stuff. In
No, but then
Firefox.
wouldn't you be debugging the JavaScript code instead of the Java code?
Yeah.
And is that what you want, or do you want to do both? I guess in some
Well,
scenarios.
whatever language you're writing it in, right?
Okay, so if you put the JavaScript
So the question is,
into
which
your
language
Java
are you
class,
writing it in?
So if we had
Oh,
chose
got
like
it. I
EXCJS,
understand.
right, and Firebug was as good
But in
as Eclipse-
GWT, right, if I'm writing a custom component, I may be debugging the JavaScript. But if I'm using a standard component, I'm probably just debugging the Java then? Is that...
Yeah, I mean, we're always debugging Java. I mean, as far as the JSNI methods we've had to write, it's, I think
Gotcha.
one or two.
Oh,
It's
okay.
just to like
Okay,
import
pretty limited.
JavaScript and, parse it and stuff like that.
Interesting.
So, I mean, it works pretty well. And, as far as, the speed of the site, I mean, the biggest thing we found is just real performance problems from a developer perspective, like to actually build it. It takes a while because it
Uh,
generates different files for each browser.
Right.
Gotcha.
And so what we did is we trimmed down, right, and only supported Safari.
Okay.
And you can
Like
you can
during
set that up.
development, and
right.
then you
Right,
turn
right.
it back up to everybody.
That's an interesting part of the story is we started to go to QA today, and things were breaking in IE6, and a fellow developer of mine
Naturally.
starts like debugging right in Firefox and trying to do IE and stuff like that, and prints out the detailed JavaScript, starts walking through it. And I'm like, good luck with that, because even though it's not obfuscated, it's still
Yeah,
you know,
unreadable.
very unreadable.
Well, and it's not
And,
even what you're used to
interesting.
living in because you're.
Well, and then we realized that we were only generating for Safari.
Oh.
So switched
you're
on
trying to run
everything.
the
Well, and then
Safari
even this
code.
afternoon, I lost like
Crazy.
2 hours because the navigation wouldn't work in Firefox,
Huh.
right? And like the history didn't work, so you couldn't do back forward and stuff like
Yeah.
that. Same issue.
Huh.
So it works enough that you
Interesting.
think it's generated the JavaScript, but then
Right.
there's nuances between browsers,
Interesting.
right? And so as soon as we remove that line,
Right.
it works in everything.
There must be some like debug thing that you could throw in there to like tell you what your browser is,
Right. By the
or
way,
tell you what
dumb shit
browser
you're
is
using.
compiled for.
This is
Right.
compiled
QA
for
builds,
whatever.
Yeah, yeah, totally. Huh.
So that's the only
Interesting.
problem that I've seen is they actually only allow you to specify one browser or all of them. Like they don't allow you to say, I want 3,
Right.
and that might be changing. And then code coverage.
Well, and it's open source, so you could go fix it.
They say that using Java, so code coverage, has that. No, it doesn't.
Yeah.
Like it doesn't work because you take your Java and you generate JavaScript. So how do
Right.
they instrument JavaScript to make sure?
Right.
You parsed everything,
Yeah,
you
yeah.
know?
You could have code coverage on your Java code, but it's not really
Right.
true code coverage for
Yeah,
what's actually.
it works with
executed.
some tools, but it's weird.
It is a paradigm that the more I hear, the more I'm like, it's makes sense. But when I first heard it, I was like, why would you ever want to go that direction?
The refactoring suite.
Yeah, no,
And the testing,
right,
Yeah,
and
as
the
you hear the
ability-
reasons, it's like,
Getting
oh,
a
that
lot
does
of the-
make sense. But on the surface, it seems backwards.
Right.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
how's it compared? So you're what, 6-7 weeks in? How's it compare to? How would you rank it and compare it to the other frameworks you've worked with in Java?
Well, it's similar from the sense of, if you're doing struts or you're doing Wicked or you're doing something like that, I mean, you're writing Java code,
Yeah.
Yeah.
right? And it is verbose sometimes, but, the ability to just refactor something into a widget makes it pretty easy to actually reuse that code. So I like it a lot from the perspective of it's actually producing a pretty kick-ass UI.
Yeah.
Well, that's cool.
But the reason it's producing a kick-ass UI is because we have a CSS ninja on the team.
Nice.
Right,
Yeah.
and so that's the biggest thing that people say about GWT apps is,
Right.
they're not pretty unless
Yeah,
you have a
their
good
demos are
CSS
awful.
person.
Right, get a great
But isn't that
CSS.
the same thing for any
Yeah,
web
yeah,
app? I mean,
yeah.
The only distinction, and I'm not a Adobe evangelist or anything, but my experience with Flex is even without the UI, pretty capabilities. I'm a coder. I'm not a designer.
Right.
The stock stuff is actually pretty decent.
Looks good out of
That
the box.
doesn't, by the way, mean though that you're going to build a good user experience.
Right.
But you can show somebody a feature and they're not distracted by how ugly it is,
Right.
which most Java apps, web apps I've built, if you don't spend some time, you're trying to show them a feature and like, yeah, we'll add that, and they're going, but why is it blue and why is this box this
Right.
way? And
Well, and that's why like PHP and Ruby on Rails web apps always look so good because I have a feeling that those are a lot of times designers
yeah,
that get into web app development.
coming from the other
Right,
direction.
so they already know how to make it look good,
Right.
and then it's
Yeah.
talk to
Yeah,
a
yeah.
database.
You just
kind of
don't
thing.
realize that it's going to fall down
Java
scalability and
developers
get
are like,
hacked.
we have to put it on the web? No.
Yeah, interesting.
Right.
So the Sophia thing,
still on the
are we all going there, or is there still going to be a place for Struts and Wicket and Tapestry and all those frameworks?
There's so many companies that still need the traditional, like, web applications that don't need SEO or any of that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Like I'm logging into my bank, right?
Right.
And I'm gonna use this
Yeah,
app.
anything behind
Those
the
should
login.
totally be rich internet applications, right? You would love that to not wait for a page refresh and stuff like that. But there's so
So-
many that are still websites.
Right.
Right, that need the traditional
distinguishing
serve up a
between a
page.
website and a web application.
You're saying that
Yeah.
there will be, or that we'll always need that to be their functionality?
Now I think websites will always be around unless we can solve the
Sure.
SEO problems
Yeah.
with a rich internet application. Right? And
Do you
they're
think-
kind of doing that with, Google indexing Flex, but
But isn't it
Not quite there yet,
we've
right.
talked a lot about this today actually, isn't, from my perspective, it's a mismatch, The idea of indexing pages like Craigslist or Wikipedia very much fits the current search paradigm. What does
Yeah.
it really mean if you have a real application to index it, right?
Well, do you need to? If it's an application, you don't need to.
Well, yeah,
that's what I'm saying,
if
right?
they're
Well, unless
true.
it's like an e-commerce application or something.
then
You know,
you're-
it's like Amazon
yeah.
is an application, but there's a lot of indexable stuff.
I guess it's how much is public,
right.
right? How much is
Right.
open
Well,
to
even
the web.
take away the search engine thing. Even if I'm on an internal app and I have some search appliance and I want people to, not so much a security constraint, but I have this application that does very rich things and needs rich features. Does the page-based search take me to a location thing make sense? Does it fit the paradigm?
Well, instead of actually implementing, like, getting Google search box or whatever they provide and crawling your site, you write your own search.
But is it a
And then-
legitimate way to navigate an RA, right?
Well, Gmail.
Like I want to find.
Isn't Gmail a way better way to do email because you can search?
But email's so page-based. It fits the page.
But Gmail's not page-based.
Gmail's not, but I'm saying many RAs are.
But I'm saying
The content within an RA.
search is key
Yeah,
because you don't really want to click for stuff. You just want to search
true.
and then
Yeah.
find it, right? I mean,
True.
if you can type in keywords, done. And
It is definitely the Mac OS challenge to my statement and the whole spotlight thing that it's true.
Wouldn't
There are
it be-
things that I don't think of as traditional search, and I've been on Mac for like a year,
But
and I
so-
still have to think, oh yeah, go use Spotlight because I'm
Right.
so used to. Let me navigate my directory of files.
The interesting thing about the Mac thing is that in order for that search to work, these applications have to kind of expose their index method
Very much the
to the
Adobe.
search engine. And so I wonder if that's where we need to go with search engines and RAAs is why can't we just expose our index method as a service that then these search engines
Isn't
can
that
use?
basically what you guys are doing with the Swift and giving Google and Yahoo the?
Yeah.
Is it the next step then where
What-
developers can write to that and say, here's how?
Well, it's
Well,
a sitemap, right?
What Google wants to
what?
do,
It's a sitemap. So Google,
Yeah.
you can do sitemap to Google, but is that standard across all the different search engines?
right?
So you can feed Google an XML file that has
Right, yeah.
your URLs in it,
Yeah,
and you
that's
can
a good
do this in
point.
Flex. You can do
Is
it
that
in
we already
GWT.
have this way of doing it
That
as a
here's
sitemap,
the
but-
URL and it uses hashes or whatever, but it goes to where
Right.
that part of your app.
Yeah, yeah.
So that'll work, but I don't want to have to generate 10 of them.
Right.
I want
Yeah.
one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It goes to
we need
everywhere.
a standard for.
And if that's the
Well, and
case,
within
then
an RA,
solves
that
the problem.
probably gets a little more involved, but it's probably the same concept, right? And
It's
I
the same
code this
concept with
hook in,
any page-based in the back end in that, once that starts to happen, you as a developer have to think, well, what happens if this is the first page they hit?
Yeah.
right.
Right? Because with RAs, typically you're like, I always expect my users to go click, click, click now.
Yeah.
Right?
You're
And as
losing
soon
a
as you
lot
start
of
doing
state
that, it's like now, and then you got to build up this, whatever state you have.
It does
to get
seem
to
like
there.
in a perfect world, eventually, like in a framework like Flex or whatever RA you're using, there's some sort of API built in to support your. You still have to manage the state and make sure.
Right.
But let me say out to Adobe, and I know there's some of this with deep linking and stuff, but having some notion of programming for
Yeah.
that.
Well, it's gotta
Generate
be
me
like
the sitemap, right?
right.
yeah,
It's
but
gotta be
based
at
on
some
based on some annotation or something I put
Yeah.
in my code, not
Yeah.
There's gotta be
not
some-
just go hand make it out of.
There's got to be some like application framework construct that describes the different states and the how to get the information for those
Yeah.
states.
Right.
And
And
you,
I don't think it's any different from a traditional web app where you're still going to have to check for stuff, right?
Right.
Okay, they don't have this, so kick them back a page or make them log in. or
state
stuff
management
like that.
wise, it's the same, but
Right.
it's such a clear like paradigm, right? Like in a regular web application, you know exactly what your URL is to your page.
Right.
yeah.
And a
I
lot of
think
RAs you're not even thinking about.
The beauty of the IRA is that you get really away from storing the server session state, and that's where scalability just dies.
Yes.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And
No, it's
Like with
but,
JSF, where
but at the same
your
time-
session becomes
right.
Mondo
Yeah,
because you're
any of the
hooked on for every
component-based
client.
frameworks, right? They
Yeah.
all do it,
Yeah.
and sure you can put it on the client, but no one does it,
Right.
But the problem with putting it all on the client, with GWT or Flex or something like that, is now your users got to wait for the initial download, and then all of a sudden their browser locks up and stuff like that. So
Yeah.
chances are you're not going to solve a lot of problems, but they're new problems, and I think they're interesting, and that's what
Yeah.
makes it fun.
Totally. Yeah.
So you've been doing a lot of evaluations of not just on this project, but on your blog and in presentations about the different web frameworks. So where are we at? Where are we going? What's interesting? Just
So I'll put this on the record. I think component-based frameworks I don't see a point.
component based?
Yeah.
Really?
Define what you mean, because
Yeah, that's interesting.
So
Wow.
JSF and Wicket and Tap.
Server side component?
Yeah.
Oh, okay,
Oh, I
but not
think-
client side.
So the
component.
reason that I think that is because they're maintaining state,
right.
which is inherently tough to scale. and
So we should title this cast "Matt Raible makes big declaration."
I've said
about
this on my blog
JSF
before.
and Wicket.
It's not new, but I think they're all trying to develop these widgets that can be done with Ajax frameworks.
Well, they're the
Right,
most
it's from
elaborate
UI
hacks in the
frameworks.
world, though. It's almost amazing they were able to do it. Like, that's how we describe JSF here. It's like, it's
Shocking that it works.
Well, no, it's like the most elaborate hack in the world, and yes, you can do things, but it's wild, and it just
Right.
doesn't. It's gone beyond where browser technologies can really thrive.
Right.
It's
But
So
I mean,
if you were building
they're all-
Craigslist, what would you build it in?
well, whatever it's built in, PHP or something like that. I mean,
Yeah,
it's wicked fast,
it's
and
a
there's-
perfect. It's the perfect
So-
non-RA app, though, isn't it?
PHP
Right.
is like a total non-component framework,
right,
And
it's straight to the database, right?
so
and it's fast.
so and if we're doing Java, we do it in just JSPs and
sure,
But
why
that,
not?
but you're talking about then you're getting
or
into,
struts too, or like would that
Why
be
not struts one?
I mean, struts.
You only
Struts
have like
one sucks. You
two.
know,
I know, but you only have like two actions:
Right.
search and get record. I mean, the point is, I think the bigger point with Craigslist is the type of application. I never want to go and log into Craigslist. I guess I don't even log in. I never want to go to Craigslist.org and get an RA. I never do. I want to get page-based ads that I click and.
Right.
I
Same
might
with
want to have like a
Wikipedia.
widget, a rich widget for
The only
Craigslist
widget
stuff.
I want is to draw. Sorry, somebody go implement this. This is one of our
This is
great
our
ideas.
startup idea. We can't talk.
We're
about
never
this.
going to do it, so
We're
whatever.
never gonna do it. All right.
I want somebody to go let me draw a circle over Google Maps and tell me all the ads in that radius for my search criteria.
Yeah.
And it's totally simplistic to implement if Craigslist just took an
Geo-based
address.
searches.
Yeah.
It's like I'm looking for a house to rent or buy,
That's
and I'm
the
gonna
only-
like
The
select
iPhone
a
does that
specific
pretty good,
region.
right?
Well,
But you need the
kinda.
Craigslist
Like,
ad
find the
where all the
restaurants.
information
It
is.
does find restaurant, but Google search, and especially on my BlackBerry, it doesn't factor location in as much as it factors in like what it thinks
Keyword.
is relevance, keyword relevance.
Right.
And what I really want is like, all right, I've found the exact region on my map that I want to search in. Now
Exactly.
find me everything in that region.
It's the I'm lazy. I want to buy a guitar, but I only want to buy it in the 3 neighborhoods around me. I'm not going
Right.
to drive to Golden to pick up a guitar.
It's got to exist, though, right?
It should, but the
It
problem
should. I
is
haven't
all
seen
they
it.
have to do is if Craigslist took addresses, doing the geocode and mapping, it's all in Google Maps.
Well, here's
Actually,
the
the-
funny thing about that, though, is it doesn't matter what technology that's written in.
no.
No, it
You
doesn't
just
at all.
care about the app.
But and
Right.
the point is though, it's a total sidetrack because the actual point is there's apps I do not want to ever be RAs, and they're page-based apps. Wikipedia,
Right.
I don't want any rich features. I want something
Just
that
wanna
helps me
read it.
find the content, search, and then I want the page.
Right.
And I don't want anything else getting in the way.
Right.
And so that's why, like, from a technology perspective, there's still a use for traditional technologies. And I love your answer. I don't care what it's built in; it works and it's fast.
Make
But-
it fast.
But so I think
That's
that's like a different question than like the whole point you were working down on. You hate component-based frameworks. Not
I don't hate 'em, I
Sorry,
just-
sorry.
They don't scale.
Summarized.
They're over-engineered.
Yeah, sorry. Great way to say it. But so from a technology perspective, there's not a use case you would use a component-based framework for at this point.
A server-side component-based framework.
The biggest reason I have from
The client-side runtime guy.
I like the client side, right?
Well, I actually agree because I thought that's what you meant at
Well,
first.
GWT is a client-side.
Well, and what I'm
component
saying is I
framework.
can get all those widgets on the client with either YUI or
Well, and
Dojo or something like
it's a
that.
better target for them.
Right.
Yeah.
And the biggest reason I don't like components-based frameworks as a consultant is I know that if I go into a client and I use something like Struts 2 or Spring MVC, those developers can learn it in less than a week and be productive with
That's
it.
not your experience with JSF? Sorry.
JSF.
Personal experience.
Any of them, Wicked.
No, I know.
you
My personal ones with
Tapestry, they're
JSF.
like, man, it took me like 4 months to learn, but now I really like it.
Yeah.
You know, and it should be like a week. It shouldn't be 4 months.
Yeah.
You know.
It's so true. It's amazing how often it's disregarded, but how much skill set and learning curve and those things factor into what we should be using as
Right.
technologists.
Now, I mean, they're all getting better, right? I got to give them that. Like Wicket and Tapestry and JSF, they're all getting better,
Yeah.
but they're becoming more like the request-based frameworks,
Right.
right? And so it's like, sure, you went off on this tangent and that sounded good or whatever, but now you're coming back more like, you know,
Right.
the ones that are doing REST. And, you know, they're all saying, well, we do RESTful stuff because we have URLs that work instead of posts for everything, you know?
It's the cycle of the industry. Like we take something and we simplify it, and then we say it's better because it's easier, but we stripped out most of the features you need, and then we add them back in, and then it sucks. So we bring out something new that
Yeah.
mean, that's
it's
what
also-
REST is. And now I'm like, okay, security and transaction management and all this stuff, and we'll slowly add them back in, and then REST will be the devil. And
There's a reference to Spring in there about recreating EJB, right? Is that what that was?
Never mind. I won't quote you on camera. There's off-camera conversations and on-camera conversations, and I'm respecting the boundary.
Okay. Do we need more beer?
Matt needs a refill.
I'll take another one.
And James is driving tonight, so I'm gonna
That's
have a
right.
refill.
I am driving tonight. So we're going up to Crest Butte to a Flex Jam that
Right.
Pre-Cycle is hosting. So.
Yeah, I was trying to harass him to go into that.
It was
but,
the worst pour of my life. I'm sorry.
Quite the head. But you filled it right to the half a liter.
But it
so
goes perfect with the,
And look at how I pour my own beer.
the old label there.
But look at how I pour my own beer. I'm sorry.
Oh well.
So we'll be here for another 10 minutes.
It's the
but-
bottle. I was, yeah. It's interesting because I'm not even railing on JSIF and Wicket, and I might rail on Tapestry, but that's because James told me like 7 years ago, learn this, and I spent the month and hated it. But it doesn't.
But Howard's such a nice guy.
Yeah, no, and he's brilliant. I'm not taking it away
Tapestry
from
5
him.
is good.
And there wasn't
lot
a
better.
good answer then to building like real applications. You could.
There was no
you did, you
component
just-
model. There was no
yeah,
component frame.
and we do need components. That's why like
We do need
the
components.
term to describe it threw me off because that may be common.
We need them client side.
Right.
Yeah, it's about pushing them to client, whether it's through GWT
Well, now
or
it's
Dojo
funny
or
about Tapestry 5. It's learning annotations. Right? I mean, and that's where, like, if you compare GWT to Tapestry 5, it's like GWT, you're writing Java,
Yeah.
and you understand it, right? Because there's no fancy magic or whatever. And with Tapestry 5, it's you're learning annotations that if you put this here, then magic will happen.
it's the
And
hibernate.
that's Seam too, right? Seam and Hibernate. I mean,
Yeah.
even Spring's getting into that game, you know?
and I love it in some places, but I think
Where's-
it would be hard on the client to, like, I like annotating up my beans and having them persist, and that's all goodness, but to me that's a simpler, there's such a one-to-one thing between the result. I know there's black box magic that happens and you don't know session hell, but I know that my person object eventually maps down to my person table, and
Right.
UI, man, that would be scary.
Right.
To have
well, I
all
mean,
of-
if you look at the back end, right, and you look at annotations and stuff like that, and you know the reason they're there is to reduce amount of code,
Yeah,
right? And then you compare something like that with like Grails and Groovy, and that's the same thing. But you look at Grails and Groovy, and it's like it's just more concise code and easier to understand rather than just a bunch of these @@ symbols with words after
Well,
it
part of
that you
it-
want to click
yeah.
on and it doesn't tell you much.
It's very
right?
true, but it also in Java, it's also to reduce XML code, which
Right.
which
Well,
is
it's the
more
link binding
offensive.
thing, right?
I know that
It's,
Java's verbose and ugly, but my frustration's always been writing XML and having this other config file that I can't see.
Right.
The interesting thing that, about Grails and Groovy is that this is almost getting into the DSL for building web UIs or
Right.
Sophia app-based applications.
Sophia. You're really going with that, huh?
Well, you know what people really
like
want?
it.
So they want whatever DSL that makes sense to them, whether it's
Right.
Grails or whatever. But they want to take that and they want to put it into Java code and Flex code
Yeah.
or GWT and RESTful services or something like that,
Right.
right? So all they want is the DSL that's easier to understand. But they don't really want whoever wrote it their output, right? They want to be able to modify it to their own. So if you could
Interesting way to
take
state it.
if you could take Grails
Yeah,
and make it produce, you know, a Jersey backend with Hibernate.
yeah.
And that's all Java code,
Yeah.
right? And a GWT or Flex front end. That thing would sell like wildfire,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
you could
yeah.
even charge for it and people would buy it.
Yeah.
Is
Right.
it pretty much the point in the world where if Java developers don't already know it, they should assume they're going to learn at least one new language to put with? Like, is there really going to be the Java developer writing pure Java the next 5 years? Or
The
is it going
only
to be,
Java developer
I added
that-
Grails or added, I know GWT is a Java paradigm, but I would imagine you're looking at JavaScript at some point or added Flex or...
Well, is there a Java developer that only writes Java? He's got to touch
5 years
SQL
ago,
code, really, right?
true, but 5 years
Yeah.
ago it was like Java, XML, and SQL, right?
Right.
And now it's like Java. Hopefully, you're not seeing SQL.
You're probably
anymore.
doing CSS and HTML and JavaScript, though. I mean, you're already up
It's
to
true.
a
It's
few
true.
languages there,
But it's
you know?
interesting
Yeah.
how many people they're adding the new languages. Seems like a new thing, but to your point, I
Right.
guess
So
it's not.
the nice thing about the new languages like JRuby and Groovy, like if they're in your company and in your ecosystem, let's
Yeah.
say your project or whatever, is the people that develop with those can develop very fast, right? And they're productive and they're good at it.
Right.
But when you're the Java developer that has to interact with that, and you see stack traces that are just enormous, and you look at the code and you don't understand any of it, it's like, who the fuck added this in? Right?
That's the
Why can't this just be Java and I go refactor that and I know how to do it?
That's the challenge with any new thing, though, right?
Right.
And also the thing where we won't show these back to back, but I just said this in the last podcast. The myth of like, there's this picture painted where you're going to use whichever tool best fits the problem, whether it's Scala or JRuby or Groovy. It's crazy to me working with, primarily consult with IT shops, and why would you ever let anybody drag in all those languages from a skill set perspective, right?
Like if a consultant comes in, you'd be like, no.
Yeah, and I may have written like 6,000 more lines to do it, but that may be cheaper in the long run than... So to me, it's like +1, right? Java +1, whether... For me, on my current projects, it's Java plus Flex, but it may be Java plus Groovy or Ruby or whatever.
Yeah, and so down the road, I mean, Java developers are going to have to learn something new to get into Sophia. I'm tossing it out there till it sticks, man.
There,
Why are you so in love with Sophia? You didn't even know what it was.
What
like
about
30
Climax?
minutes ago.
I know we're going with Climax.
Yeah, get your Climax here.
Sock.
Is it
so? Java developers are going to have to learn some new.
I have the other
some
half
new
of this
language.
question.
So whether it's JavaFX, whether it's Grails, whether it's EXTJS, GWT, Flex, whatever, they're going to have to learn something else in the next 3 to 5 years, right?
And aren't they learning that because Sun never gave us a UI?
Well, they gave us JavaFX.
I know, but because Sun never gave us a timely or well-conceived UI. Like, is there any other part of the Java platform where people are bringing in?
Well, I think the thing that's not stated much is that JSPs and servlets were a wild success.
This is true.
Right, and so were Java Web Frameworks.
But then we added 9 layers of architecture to obfuscate that.
Right, but I mean, Java really on the server side took off, and I mean, it's powered the whole web for so long, and sure, PHP has as well, but I mean, there's a plethora of Java developers, so even though we hate all the frameworks,
well, and everything
it's done very well.
Everything we're dealing with now is still based on servlets.
That's a great point.
Right.
Yeah.
And my last 3 clients have servlet and JSP based architectures.
Yeah.
Right, and they've been very successful. So it's not really about what you write it in; it's about how good your business idea and execution is.
Well, from making money from a pain of coding standpoint, there is this notion of JSP is a great way to get data from web to server, but I still need components to represent that data, and
But if you don't have good testing and good test coverage,
I agree.
You're going to rewrite that thing in 2 years. Doesn't matter what you write it in.
Well, I thought in this industry we wrote it in 2 years, no matter how good a job we did.
Right. But
Because there's always the new consultant.
They've actually lasted like 6.
Wow. That should actually be the interview question: is how long did your last code stay in production? Because there's always the next consultant or the next hire that says, "Oh, this is all crap, and we need to rewrite it." And
right.
And it's about test coverage.
It's about test coverage because then other people can maintain it, right? People leave.
Right.
If you have test coverage, people can maintain it. Otherwise, it's just like, I'm going to change this, and God, I hope it works.
Yeah. So out of all these, God, I don't want to use the Sophia word again.
You love the Sophia word. Why can't we go with Climax?
Okay. So this next generation of technology, have you evaluated the testability of these different frameworks, and what are you seeing there? Like, how testable are these?
So it's difficult. I mean, Selenium helps a lot, especially with the Ajax-based ones, because you can fire up different browsers and click through.
And that's being the answer,
like
to
automated integration testing or something. So are you talking about unit testing, the automated testing?
So it depends on what framework you're using. I think with GWT, like you would like to think that you could unit test all of it because it's Java, but a lot of the frameworks that you're basing your stuff on will typically have those JSNI methods in there, and then it says, by the way, you can't use this. So there's a GWT test case that you can use, but then it's kind of slow.
Right.
But, I mean, there's ways around everything, but it's basically an initial struggle that I will document well on my blog or whatever, that how to get over that unit testing stuff.
Right.
And then it's not true unit testing because you have to mock out your services if you want that. And stuff
Is it realistic to unit test for? I mean, like on a server side, I can get pretty good quality assurance and you still need QA. I'm not saying that anyway, but I can get a pretty good idea of how being able to refactor and cover my code on the server. Is it realistic in a RAA to do that through developer level testing, or does that really involve a Mercury and doing record playback?
Yeah, that's a good point.
We have both. So we have our unit tests right now, and we do have to use GWT test case for the reasons I mentioned. But we have about 80% code coverage, on classes. And then
Does that give you the
85.
same confidence as if you had 80% code coverage on your Spring in Hibernate or EGB in Hibernate or?
No.
Okay,
Because it's different for the different browsers, right?
well, not just
and-
different browsers, but
and
even
it's-
just the application. It's such a different thing. to
Like
test the
testing
UI.
user interface, seems like a totally different thing than testing your backend
Right.
business logic and
Right.
data logic.
I know that I expect this object with these properties populated to.
I mean, the dumbest thing you can ever have is not have people interacting with your UI as part of your
Sure.
test, right?
Yeah,
Right. You
user
need those
acceptance
people.
testing is
Right.
essential, but even from a QA perspective, it seems like it's really about simulating using it as an end user, whether it's Mercury or whatever your tool is.
So then that's automated testing, or in the Flex world, like Flex Monkey.
Well, and to me, the challenge of that is I've shifted testing and from a refactoring perspective, I've shifted the confidence to another group where server side, I can get unit test coverage and developer level coverage
Interesting.
in a place where I can have confidence that when I commit the code, I'm pretty damn sure it works. When I'm working on a UI,
right.
even with as an organization quality testing, I feel like I lose that confidence, and I'm not sure there's a good way to bring that in the same.
And it's a
Same
struggle.
level.
What I've been trying to do is actually encourage the Java developers to write the Selenium test. I mean, the Java code, so
Use those tools
Right.
on the
and they're very much in the camp that our test pass,
well.
and the QA department is supposed to be writing those. And I'm like, you wrote the code, you know what it does. Why
So
don't you write
basically,
those
from a
tests?
role perspective, you're saying use it as a developer tool.
Right.
I like that. I think it is. I can see the developer reaction because it is a. You want me to use a QA tool to do my work?
Right. I got to go do something else.
The question I have then
done.
is though, can I hook that into my automated environment?
Yeah, I mean, it's Selenium, and I don't know if the other tools support this, but you can actually, have it so you right-click on a test and run it,
Yeah.
and it fires up, your browser and runs a test, and you can
Nice.
set breakpoints and everything.
Can I put it into my cruise control build
Yeah.
though, so that
And
okay,
take screenshots and the works.
okay,
And we have all that set up, but it's been a struggle because what happens is both your back end and your front end, those have to pass before Selenium if you even start to
totally,
go,
right,
right?
yeah.
And
But it's almost the more valuable test if you can convince developers
Right.
to do it because you just got everything.
right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But it is such a
Well, and it's funny because it typically is like, man, the build keeps breaking. Let's just quit doing it.
Right. Yeah.
Right.
Great
And
answer.
then it doesn't get done, and then 6 months down the road, we're like, why is the quality so bad?
Right.
yeah.
How's the continuous
classic
integration
case.
going? Huh? Not very good. It's not even running.
It's just so easy on the server. I think part of the challenges for all these UI frameworks is Java server-side development is really phenomenal in my opinion.
it's easy.
It's really whatever your flavor is, if you embrace it and you take the time to set things up, you can really get to a point where your quality is just phenomenal.
Right.
Yeah.
And it
Well,
performs
and it's
and
easy
it
to do
scales.
test
and-
first development, right?
Yeah,
Like you can
yeah.
write your test first and
But you
enhance
bring in
it.
these UI frameworks in it.
Well, there's no way you could do test first on the UI, right?
Well,
I mean, you gotta
I'm sure
see
there's
what it
those
looks
that will
like
tell you
first.
you can. But
Right, but it's
I'm
like,
a test while guy anyway, so but yeah, I think it's a challenge though, partly because of the expectations set by the other technologies.
Right.
And it's not just the technologies, it's the paradigm. Like you said, you can't do it first on a
Right.
UI.
I think the funny thing about testing is you're always testing,
Right.
right? And the whole goal is just to automate that.
Yeah, exactly.
Right, and people don't realize that. They're like,
Right.
it's going to take me longer to write the test, and it's like, well,
No.
it's going to take you longer to keep hitting refresh and
Yeah,
clicking
yeah,
on shit.
yeah.
That's to me, like I love Hibernate annotations, but when I started with it, there was no docs.
Right.
It's like people be like, "How'd you figure that out?" Like I wrote a test and I hit it 100,000 times until I found the right mix of,
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's easier, not harder.
The best thing is to sit back and like you have Selenium tests running and your computer's doing work and like your manager walks behind you or whatever, and it's just flashing and stuff.
If you're
They're
drinking a beer for your podcast,
like, they're like,
thinking
wow,
about
He
climax.
appears to be working really hard.
that's great.
So have you looked very deep into how testing works with some of the other next generation?
Well, Flex Monkey I think is huge, right? I mean that really helped the whole Flex story.
Yeah, certainly.
And Selenium.
You'll
with
get
Open
mad
Web.
props for saying that here at the Gorilla Logic World Headquarters, by the way.
The rest of them, Selenium seems to solve that story pretty well.
Yeah.
And And I think it would be difficult if we had chosen a pure Ajax framework like EXTJS
Right.
to learn their testing framework. I know there's Fire Unit now from the jQuery guys.
Yeah, interesting.
That might make it easier, but
Yeah.
typically what's going to happen is whatever language you choose, you're going to become an expert in it, right?
Right,
So
right.
nut up
Hopefully.
and learn it.
Yeah.
So-
right?
Yeah.
And then learn the testing tools too.
So before we wrap up, I threatened to do this, but I figured I would. So we've got the Java open web, open source guru. You said, I believe you described him as huge when we entered the podcast, and we have the Adobe evangelist. So you when you talked about evaluating the Ajax stuff, and I know this is more of a client decision in that case, but what reasons do you see that people shouldn't be using Flex? Or, and I know I'm not saying you're suggesting that they shouldn't, but in many cases it sounds like you've selected a Java-based framework or Ajax-based framework. Is there reasons why you think people might not want to do that, or the challenges they may encounter?
So the biggest reason is going to be, well, this is funny. So, most people say accessibility.
Yeah.
But Flex is actually 508 compliant and Ajax isn't, so
Yeah, and
that one's out the door.
That standard, that one is an uninteresting argument to
But
me.
isn't that because Adobe just paid the people who write those 508 tools?
Well,
a lot
and
of
those
money
standards
to
are based
make it work?
on, what, HTML3, I don't know, I'm
Right.
trying to make a joke
Well,
here,
it's
I don't really
screen
have one.
readers though, right? Screen readers able to read the content.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
I think those are challenges that, if you're in the right setting, if I'm building a government website, that is probably my number one requirement.
Right,
But let's pretend that doesn't exist, and who cares?
right.
Accessibility.
SEO, doesn't matter.
Let's assume it's the same challenge whether you're in an Ajax world or a.
So I think the biggest problem is from a pure, let's develop a one-page kind of application. Right, we're
Right.
not trying to do progressive enhancement or anything like
Sure.
that. We've thrown all that out the window. It's going to be a one-page application. It's a bank application, right? The biggest problem between the two, and it's even a problem with GWT, is getting it to pop. Right, like I want
Yeah.
a half-second response.
Yeah.
Right, I want to pull up the app and I want it to be fast. And when I click on stuff, I want it to be fast. And that's a problem with both GWT and
Yeah.
it's a problem with Flex as well. In the other Ajax frameworks, I don't know so much because typically you aren't writing the whole app.
Yeah.
Right. So there's not this initial download.
Yeah.
Right. And even with GWT, I mean, we're 6 weeks in and our JavaScript files that are produced are 500K.
You.
Right.
That sounds a lot like your platform.
That's like Flex.
It's like, are we using all this? What the heck's going on?
Yeah.
Well, and you're-
But the beauty is we have this little Flex widget that's like that big and that's 200K.
Yeah.
But we have our
Because in
app
both
at
cases, you're
500K.
probably bringing the whole SDK down for.
Right.
Yeah.
But I mean, with gzip, right, gets that down to like 139.
So can you
still
Yeah,
so
pretty
can you
good.
build RAs that target low bandwidth clients, or is it just a mismatch?
I think it's a bad idea.
So then you're back to hopefully you're building a
Well, you do like
use cases
you
like
do like Google did with
Craigslist.
Gmail, and you say if you want to use this, you got to use these two browsers, and if you don't, then in 6 months we'll have something you can use.
Right.
But so that's very easy for someone that's
It's easy when
developing
you give your
something
software
new.
away too.
Right, and it's easy for something new, but when it's something like you're rewriting, it's very difficult because you're basically saying it worked before, but now it's
But
not.
now you're host,
Right. And it's
Thanks
because
for
we have
coming.
spinners and fades and stuff like that, right?
so we could do this nice jiggle transition out. Is there other challenges you see to whether it doesn't have to be specific to Flash, but JavaFX, Silverlight, to kind of that? I kind of group it as the client side runtime thing. Are there challenges you see to that keep you in the browser?
Well, the beauty of the challenges is that they're actually, browsers are back, right? They're evolving and
Did they go away?
Yeah.
they're doing well. They just
They're
stagnated.
finally changing the standard.
Well,
and-
IE6, right? Still got like 25% market share, and it was invented 8 years ago.
yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and the standard hasn't changed since I entered the industry.
Right,
So.
right. And HTML5, I mean,
Yeah, it's
Safari
coming.
4 came out today, and they're doing a lot of cool stuff with
Oh,
that.
cool. I didn't see that.
So,
Didn't know that. Big announcement
and
on
it's got
Drunk on Software.
tabs on the top.
Oh,
Just like Chrome.
Like Chrome.
Yeah, and
Nice.
it's fast. Apparently,
Nice. Well,
Google's
fast is
influence
always
again.
good.
I downloaded it, tried
Does
to
it-
install it, but it had me install like 8 other things before I could install it, so
Nice.
it never happened.
Not if Jobs was there.
It's like
that would
Microsoft,
happen.
right? You got to install Service Pack 2 before you can get IE8.
Is it have the same memory issues as Firefox? Is my fan going to turn on my MacBook every time I?
Oh, my freaking fan runs like mad all day long.
Especially with your IDE issues when you're firing up
Yes.
both.
Right, I've had both running, and that really, and then
Yeah.
hosted mode and maxing
Not
out.
happy.
Do you have more questions on Safari? Because I was just going to bug Matt on @Fetus before we wrap up.
No, let's.
Did I say
yeah,
Safari?
let's
I meant Sophie. Your
Sophia?
pet Sophia.
I bet if we called it Sophie, that might work.
Would
Sophie?
Jenny be all right
Sophia?
if I bought you a dog and said you had to call it Sophia?
Depends on what kind of dog.
What kind of dogs does Jenny like?
What are they called? Those cute little.
Cavalier King Charles Spaniel.
Exactly.
Kind you can put in your bag.
I
and
have one.
carry it in your purse.
No.
So what's up with AppFuse? Is that an active project, or are you still?
So the problem with that is it's similar to the when I work on and when I use open source in a project, I get to develop AppFuse
Yeah.
and make it better.
Right.
And so I had a 1.5 year gig where it was all proprietary technologies, and AppFuse was kind
So
of
no
back burner
AppFuse.
because I wasn't using it.
Well,
on
it's kind of a
day-to-day
jump
basis.
start technology anyway, right? So
Right.
if you're into a project,
Right.
And you're one of
So-
those guys who has like a life, and when he gets home at night, he does.
You don't
other
write
things
code
other
all
than
night?
Code,
I used to. But
You
now
used to.
I
You
used
did.
to. Now I've discovered that there's a lot better things to
Well,
do.
then you live in
we
Colorado.
just brought the
so,
beer
you
into
know.
the work. So.
That works too. So yeah, it's one of those things that I keep promising that there'll be a release next month, and then next month comes around and I'm like, never got to that.
How does
Sorry.
so from the Ant to Maven shift, which could be a whole other conversation from my personal perspective. I'm one of those last few hanging with his fingernails onto Ant, but
Right.
does the archetype thing overlap Ant Fuse, or does it complement it?
It makes it easier.
Okay.
So the biggest reason I like Maven is it's made AppView so much easier to maintain.
Yeah.
So I don't really care what the users think because I develop AppViews
And
for
you're
me.
doing it for free.
Right, and I'm doing it for free, and it works for me. And so if I can maintain it easier,
Yeah.
I'm all for
totally,
it, right?
yeah.
So that was the major reason behind the transition. A lot of things we were doing were things that Maven provided. So I was able to do that. And the interesting thing is the Maven ecosystem has been very encouraging of AppViews and
That's cool.
done
That is
things
very cool.
that I didn't expect them to do to make it easier and stuff like that. And there's like if I had 3 months, I think it would blow you away what I could do with it. But it's like, who's going to pay me to work on AppViews
Right.
for 3 months?
Yeah.
That's the rare.
But it's it would be all Sophia stuff, and I don't know that that's actually much better than like what's out there with Grails.
Yeah.
But I think there's really a lot of value with developing with native Java, especially on the back end, because you can make that stuff scale like nobody's
Yeah.
business. And then the front end, it would be adding Flex and adding GWT and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Interesting. So when you get a break, we'll see another release, and very cool.
Right. I mean, hopefully next month, but it's more of like right.
It's always next month.
Right, and then there's the month after that if that doesn't
Yeah.
work.
Then comes November and
Right.
a slow winter and the AppFuse release.
Cool. Well, it's been.
Can we title this
Insightful.
the Sophia podcast?
I think it's the Sophia.
There we
podcast.
go.
Sophia and Matt Raible. I hope that won't get you into trouble anywhere. But
Nah, I don't think it's copyrighted.
we could just make up our own upseller.
Climax. You already did.
I know, but I don't think it's for the same thing. I think Climax has a higher purpose. Sorry.
Cheers to that.
Cheers. Thanks for coming on the video
Yes,
cast.
thank you.
Yeah. Thanks, Matt.
It's fun.